Snowflakes drifted over the massacre on the night Gwendolen swore to love her gentle merchant husband forever. She thought she had married the realm's wealthiest, softest mortal, a man who bought her safety with endless gold. She never suspected the monstrous, savage beast tearing out throats was him. Smoke and the bitter scent of crushed yarrow hung heavy in the cramped apothecary of Ethelgard's lower wards. Gwendolen Hayes wiped a smudge of soot from her forehead, her calloused fingers trembling slightly as she counted the meager copper coins on the wooden counter. Life in the medieval kingdom of Oakhaven was unforgiving for a woman with no family name, save for a gambling-addicted uncle who routinely gambled away her earnings. She was 21, draped in faded linen, yet possessed a striking beauty, raven-black hair, and eyes the color of summer leaves that often drew the unwanted gaze of cruel men. Destiny arrived not with the clash of swords, but with the quiet jingling of a royal treasury. Cedric Valerius stepped into her dilapidated shop on a rainy Tuesday, bringing with him the scent of expensive sandalwood parchment and an underlying, intoxicating hint of pine. Cedric was a legend whispered about in the taverns and castle halls alike. He was the sole heir to the Valerius Trading Company, a man whose vast empire of merchant galleons, gold mines, and spice routes made him a literal billionaire in an era where most men died fighting for scraps of bread. He possessed wealth that rivaled the king's own treasury. Yet unlike the boisterous, arrogant lords of the realm, Cedric was famously soft-spoken gentle and allegedly possessed a frail constitution. I was told, Cedric began his voice, a rich, velvety baritone that sent an unexpected shiver down Gwendolen's spine, that the finest healer in Ethelgard resides here. My clerks suffer from a persistent winter cough, and I wish to purchase your entire stock of willow bark and elderberry. Gwendolen stared at him. He was breathtakingly handsome, with neatly trimmed chestnut hair, immaculate velvet doublets, spun from foreign silks, and kind, warm brown eyes. But he seemed so delicate. His hands, uncalloused and manicured, bore heavy gold rings. He carried no sword, relying instead on the looming presence of his chief bodyguard, a massive, scarred man named Kalen, who waited outside the door. "My entire stock, my lord," Gwendolen asked, her voice faltering. "That would cost 50 gold pieces. It is a king's ransom." Cedric smiled, a sweet, boyish grin that completely disarmed her. He reached into his velvet pouch and placed 100 gleaming gold coins on the counter. "Then consider the rest a deposit for your future services, Lady Gwendolen. A woman of your talent should not be shivering in a drafty shop." That single transaction ignited a courtship that became the scandal and envy of the entire kingdom. Cedric Valerius, the wealthiest magnate in Oakhaven, courted the lowly herbalist with a tenderness that defied logic. He sent carriages lined with heated furs to bring her to his sprawling estate. He bought her dresses, woven with silver thread, and hired the finest bards to sing to her while they dined on roasted swan and spiced wine. Whenever danger approached, be it a drunken tavern patron or a corrupt tax collector, Cedric never raised a hand. He simply paid them off, smiled his gentle smile, and hurried Gwendolen away. He abhorred violence. "Swords are for men who lack the intellect to use their words, my darling," he would tell her, kissing the back of her hand. Why shed blood when gold can build bridges? Gwendolen fell deeply, irrevocably in love with his kindness. When Cedric proposed in the lavish gardens of his estate, sliding a ring containing a diamond the size of a robin's egg onto her finger, she wept with joy. She was escaping the slums, marrying the sweetest, most generous human being in existence. Their wedding was a spectacle of unimaginable wealth, a 3-day festival, where Cedric fed the entire city of Ethelgard. When they finally retired to the master chambers of Valerius Manor, Cedric was a patient, adoring lover. He treated her as though she were made of spun glass, whispering poetry against her skin. Yet, as the weeks of their honeymoon phase blended into months, tiny, inexplicable anomalies began to prick at the edges of Gwendolyn's perfect reality. For a man who claimed to have a frail constitution, Cedric radiated an unnatural furnace-like body heat. Even in the dead of winter, with the hearth unlit, the bed-sheets scorched with his warmth. Furthermore, despite his delicate hands, Gwendolyn once saw him casually lift a massive overturned oak carriage to free a trapped hound in the courtyard, only to immediately feign a strained back when the stable boys rushed over. And then there were the nights of the full moon. Every month for 3 nights, Cedric would kiss her forehead, his eyes dark and apologetic. A severe bout of my childhood fever. My love, he would lie, his voice strained. I must quarantine in the north wing. I cannot bear the thought of infecting you. He would disappear behind the heavy iron-wrought doors of the restricted wing, flanked by Kaelin and a dozen of his most fiercely loyal, muscular guards. During those nights, lying alone in their massive silk-draped bed, Gwendolyn would listen to the wind howling through the valley. Only the howls never quite sounded like the wind. They sounded guttural, savage, and terrifyingly close. 6 months into their marriage, the political climate of Oakhaven grew treacherous. Lord Desmond, a cruel and ambitious nobleman who controlled the kingdom's eastern military forces, had long despised Cedric's monopoly on the region's wealth. Desmond was a man of war, a brute who believed that gold belonged to those strong enough to take it with steel. He also harbored a deep, venomous jealousy that the stunning Gwendolyn had chosen a weakling merchant over true nobility. The tension reached a boiling point during the King's Summer Solstice Festival. Gwendolyn and Cedric were seated in the royal pavilion, surrounded by the kingdom's elite. Cedric wore a stunning tunic of royal blue, smiling politely, and chatting about grain tariffs, holding Gwendolyn's hand. Lord Desmond approached their table completely inebriated and flanked by his armored knights. He leaned over his breath, reeking of sour ale, and deliberately spilled his goblet of wine all over Cedric's lap. "My deepest apologies, merchant." Desmond sneered loudly enough for the surrounding nobles to hear. "I suppose you'll have to run home and have your servants clean you, unless your lovely little peasant wife wants to scrub it out for you." Desmond reached out his filthy, calloused hand, gripping Gwendolyn's wrist tightly. "Such a shame a beautiful creature like you is wasted on a coward who buys his courage." Gwendolyn gasped, pain flaring in her wrist. She looked at Cedric, expecting outrage. Instead, Cedric remained perfectly still. His head was bowed. To the onlookers he looked terrified, utterly humiliated. "Please, Lord Desmond," Cedric said, his voice dropping to a low, strange vibration that Gwendolyn had never heard before. "Release my wife. I will gladly pay for a new cask of wine for you and your men." Desmond laughed uproariously, throwing Cedric's offer back in his face, but he dropped Gwendolyn's wrist. "Keep your dirty coins, Valerius. You're pathetic." As Desmond stalked away to the laughter of his knights, Gwendolyn felt a flush of embarrassment, not for herself, but for her husband's absolute refusal to defend his honor. But when she turned to comfort him, she froze. Cedric was staring after Desmond. His usually warm brown eyes had caught the torchlight flashing a brilliant, predatory amber. His jaw was clenched so tightly that the muscles fluttered, and a low, rumbling growl too deep for a human throat vibrated through the wooden bench they shared. Beside him, Kaelin the bodyguard had his hand resting casually on his sword hilt, watching Cedric with an expression of sheer terror, whispering frantic, hushed words in an ancient dialect. Cedric blinked, took a deep breath, and the amber vanished. He turned to Gwendolen, his sweet, gentle facade instantly restored. "Are you hurt, my darling? Let us go home. I detest such boorish behavior." The incident planted a seed of dark curiosity in Gwendolen's mind. The following week, Cedric departed for the capital to negotiate a trade treaty, leaving Gwendolen alone at the manor. It was 3 days before the full moon. Determined to understand the secrets her husband kept locked away, Gwendolen stole the heavy iron key to the north wing from Caelin's chambers, while the gruff captain was bathing. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she slipped the key into the heavy oak and iron door of the restricted corridor. The lock turned with a heavy clack. She pushed the door open, stepping into a world that completely shattered the illusion of her sweet, human billionaire. The north wing was not a quarantine ward. It was a fortress. The walls were lined with massive reinforced steel chains and heavy iron shackles deeply embedded into the stone floor. Deep gouges resembling the claw marks of a monstrous beast shredded the tapestries and dug inches deep into the solid granite walls. The scent of pine was overpowering here, mixed with the unmistakable metallic tang of dried blood and raw, unidentifiable meat. In the center of the largest room sat a massive obsidian throne draped in the pelts of giant bears. Carved into the wall behind the throne was a massive crest, a snarling wolf's head, clutching a crescent moon in its jaws. It was the ancient sigil of the Lycan Kings, a mythical race of shapeshifters believed to have been wiped out centuries ago during the Silver Crusades. Gwendolen's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled backward, her mind reeling. Cedric, her gentle poetry-reading husband, who fainted at the sight of a paper cut impossible. There had to be another explanation. Perhaps Cedric was hiding a beast. Perhaps Caelin was the monster, and Cedric was paying to keep him safe. Desperate to clear her mind, and realizing she was running low on night-blooming belladonna for her private herb garden, Gwendolen did something foolish. She ordered a horse to be saddled and rode out toward the Whispering Woods, a dense, ancient forest on the edge of the Valerius property. She needed the cold night air to calm her racing thoughts. She tied her horse to a decaying oak and ventured into the tree line, her lantern casting long, eerie shadows. She had barely knelt to harvest the belladonna when the distinct snap of a twig echoed through the silence. Gwendolen stood up, her blood turning to ice. Emerging from the darkness were 6 men. They were clad in mismatched armor, their faces scarred and eyes glinting with malicious intent. They were mercenaries bearing the crude insignia of Lord Desmond. "Well, well," the leader sneered, drawing a jagged broadsword. "The merchant's little whore out here all alone. Lord Desmond will pay a fortune for you, girl. And once we're done having our fun, maybe we'll send pieces of you back to Valerius in a silk box." Panic seized Gwendolen. She dropped her basket and ran her heavy skirts, tearing against the brambles. But she was no match for hardened mercenaries. Within seconds, a heavy hand grabbed her hair violently, throwing her to the damp forest floor. She screamed, scrambling backward as the men surrounded her, laughing cruelly, their weapons drawn. "Hold her down," the leader barked, unbuckling his heavy leather belt. Gwendolen squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the end. But the end did not come with the slice of a blade. It came with an ear-shattering demonic roar that shook the very leaves from the trees. The mercenaries froze. Out of the pitch-black darkness of the forest leapt a nightmare. It was a wolf, but unlike any natural creature of the earth. The beast stood over 7 feet tall on its hind legs, its fur as black as a starless void. Its muscles rippled with terrifying raw power under its thick coat. Its eyes burned with a blinding, furious amber light, the exact same amber Gwendolen had seen in her husband's eyes. The massacre was instantaneous, and breathtakingly violent. The leader of the mercenaries barely had time to scream before the monstrous black wolf clamped its massive jaws around his torso, severing him in two with a sickening crunch of armor and bone. The beast moved with blinding, supernatural speed. Claws the size of daggers tore through steel breastplates as if they were wet parchment. Blood sprayed across the ancient trees, raining down on the forest floor. Gwendolen pressed herself against the trunk of an oak, paralyzed by absolute terror. In less than a minute, 5 hardened mercenaries lay shredded in pieces across the grass. The remaining man, sobbing uncontrollably, tried to crawl away. The giant wolf stalked toward him, grabbed the man by the ankle, and effortlessly hurled him 30 feet into the trunk of a massive pine tree. The sickening crack signaled it was over. Silence descended upon the whispering woods, broken only by the heavy, ragged breathing of the monster. Slowly the beast turned its massive head toward Gwendolen. Blood dripped from its jaws, staining its dark fur. Gwendolen whimpered, pressing her hands over her mouth, expecting to be torn apart next. But the beast didn't attack. It lowered its massive head, its ears flattening submissively. It took a slow, hesitant step toward her, a low, rumbling whine escaping its blood-stained throat. As the creature stepped into the pale moonlight filtering through the canopy, a heavy gold chain slipped from beneath the thick fur of its neck. Dangling from the chain was a unique, teardrop-shaped emerald pendant enclosed in a gold cage. Gwendolen's heart stopped. It was the exact pendant she had given Cedric on their wedding night, a bespoke piece crafted by her own hands. The giant blood-soaked monster whined again, dropping to its belly and crawling toward her, gazing up at her with familiar, desperate brown eyes that bled into amber. "Cedric," she whispered into the frozen night. Moonlight bathed the slaughter in a sickly silver glow as Gwendolen stood, paralyzed against the rough bark of the ancient oak. The towering nightmare of black fur and bloody fangs whimpered again, a pathetic, high-pitched sound that completely contradicted its horrific size and the carnage it had just unleashed. Slowly, agonizingly, the beast began to shrink. Bones snapped and rearranged with sickening wet crunches. Thick black fur receded into pale skin. The monstrous elongated snout flattened, pulling back to reveal a familiar, sharp jawline. Within moments, kneeling naked and shivering amidst the gore of Lord Desmond's mercenaries, was Cedric Valerius. He was covered in blood that was not his own chest, heaving, his amber eyes fading back to that soft, gentle brown she had fallen in love with. He did not look like a monster anymore. He looked like a terrified boy caught in a lie. "Gwendolen." Cedric choked out, his rich voice cracking with raw panic. He reached out a trembling, blood-stained hand toward her, but stopped himself, pulling it back against his chest as if he felt unworthy to touch her. "Please, please do not run. Let me explain." Shock held her captive. Her mind fragmented desperately, trying to reconcile the gentle merchant who bought her endless silk gowns with the apex predator that had just bitten a man in half. "You," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wind. "You are a lichen. I am the Lichen King," Cedric corrected softly, his gaze dropping to the bloody soil. "The last alpha of the royal bloodline. We were not eradicated during the Silver Crusades, my love. We simply learned that fighting mortals on their terms was a fool's errand. So we adapted. We hid. We built an empire of gold instead of blood." Footsteps crashed through the underbrush. Kaelin, the massive bodyguard, burst into the clearing, flanked by a dozen guards from the estate. Only now, Gwendolen realized they were not just guards. They moved with predatory grace, their eyes flashing silver and gold in the darkness. They were his pack. Kaelin quickly draped a heavy velvet cloak over Cedric's trembling shoulders. eyeing the decimated mercenaries with a grim nod. "My Lord Desmond will notice his men are missing." Calen rumbled his voice, lacking its usual deferential merchant guard tone. He spoke to Cedric like a soldier speaking to a warlord. "We must cleanse the woods. The human king cannot know we reside in his borders." Cedric waved Calen away, his eyes never leaving Gwendolyn's terrified face. "I never wanted you to see this side of me," he whispered, stepping closer. Gwendolyn flinched, pressing her spine harder against the tree. The subtle movement was like a dagger to Cedric's heart. He collapsed to his knees in the bloody dirt, bowing his head in absolute submission. "I fell in love with your kindness, Gwendolyn. I surrounded myself with wealth, with soft things, with art and poetry, because I am so desperately afraid of the monster inside me. I vowed to never shed blood again. I wanted to be the sweet man you deserved." Tears blurred her vision. She looked at the torn bodies around her men who had promised her a fate worse than death. Cedric had broken his ultimate vow, surrendered to the beast he loathed solely to protect her. Cautiously ignoring the stench of death, Gwendolyn stepped forward. She dropped to her knees in the mud before him, her trembling hands reaching out to cradle his blood-streaked face. "You saved my life," she murmured, her thumbs wiping away the crimson stains from his cheeks. "You are a billionaire, a merchant, and a beast, but you are still my husband." Cedric unleashed a ragged sob, burying his face in her neck, clinging to her, as if she were his only tether to humanity. Back at the manor, the truth unspooled in the firelight of their chambers. Cedric explained everything. His vast wealth partnering with covert historical figures like Lord William Cavendish to secretly monopolize international trade routes was a front to buy land and safety for his scattered people. The frail constitution was a guise to avoid physical combat that might trigger his transformation. The restricted North Wing was his sanctuary during the full moon, where he chained himself to prevent his alpha instincts from hunting in the human villages. Yet the secret was unraveling. The next morning, a bloodied survivor of the mercenary squad, the one Cedric had thrown into the pine tree, was found dragging himself toward Desmond's stronghold. Winter arrived with a brutal frost mirroring the icy tension that gripped Ethelgard. Lord Desmond, having heard the ravings of his crippled mercenary, bypassed the king's courts entirely. He recognized the description of the Black Wolf. He knew what Cedric was, and he knew that the pelt of the Lycan King, along with the vast Valerius treasury, would make him the most powerful man on the continent. Desmond secretly amassed a private army, stripping the wealth from his own eastern territories to forge hundreds of weapons coated in pure, lethal silver. Gwendolyn felt the shift in her husband. The sweet, gentle billionaire was fracturing. Cedric paced the halls of the manor at night, his eyes frequently bleeding into amber, his body radiating a sweltering heat. The pack was restless. Calen and the others wanted war, demanding their alpha lead them in a preemptive strike. But Cedric stubbornly refused. "I will not start a war that will slaughter innocents," Cedric roared during a heated council meeting in the North Wing, his voice shaking the stone walls. "We have spent 3 centuries proving we are not mindless killers. I will buy Desmond out. I will offer him my mines, my galleons, whatever he wants." Gwendolyn, standing by the obsidian throne, realized the tragic flaw in her husband's noble heart. He believed his gold could pacify a man who only desired dominance. The attack came on the eve of the winter solstice. Snow fell in thick, blinding sheets as hundreds of Desmond's soldiers breached the outer walls of the Valerius estate. Flaming arrows arced through the black sky, setting the beautiful merchant galleons in the harbor ablaze. The scent of smoke and burning pine filled the air. Cedric rushed into their chambers, his face pale, barring the heavy oak doors. "Gwendolen, you must flee through the crypts. Caelan will guide you to the safe houses in the capital." "I will not leave you," she screamed over the din of clashing steel outside. "I cannot fight them," Cedric shouted, his hands gripping his hair in agony. "Desmond has armed them with silver. If I unleash the beast to protect my people, the human king will send the entire royal army to exterminate us. Everything I have built, all the wealth, the peace, it will be ashes." The chamber doors splintered. Heavy axes bit through the wood. Desmond stepped through the breach clad in heavy plate armor, wielding a massive broadsword, glowing with a deadly silver veneer. A dozen armed guards flooded the room, instantly surrounding them. Desmond's cruel laughter echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "Look at the great Alpha King," he sneered, kicking a delicate mahogany table aside, cowering in his silk pajamas like a frightened child. "Where is the monster that slaughtered my men? Come on, Valerius. Show me the beast." Cedric stood rigidly in front of Gwendolen, his arms spread wide to shield her. He maintained his human form, his breathing ragged. "Take my wealth, Desmond," Cedric pleaded, his voice cracking. "Take the manor. Take the trading company. Just let her go." "I don't want your money, merchant," Desmond spat. "I want your head on a pike." Desmond lunged. Cedric shoved Gwendolen out of the way, taking the brutal strike. The silver broadsword slashed across Cedric's chest. The metal hissed upon contact with his skin, burning his flesh with toxic agony. Cedric screamed, falling to his knees, clutching his chest as black veins spiderwebbed from the wound. Silver was poison to his kind. It suppressed his healing and crippled his strength. "Cedric!" Gwendolen shrieked, scrambling toward him, but a heavy armored boot slammed into her stomach, sending her sprawling across the Persian rug. Desmond grabbed Gwendolen by the hair, hauling her up and pressing the smoking silver blade against her throat. "Watch, beast!" Desmond sneered at Cedric, who was writhing on the floor. "Watch me slit your little wife's throat, and then I will butcher every single monster in this house." Pain blinded Gwendolen, but she didn't look at Desmond. She looked down at Cedric. She saw the pathetic desperation in his eyes, his lifelong commitment to peace paralyzing him even as his world burned. "Cedric." Gwendolen choked out the silver blade searing the delicate skin of her neck. She remembered the sheer power of the black wolf in the woods, the ancient crest of the Lycan kings, the absolute devotion of his pack. He was denying his true nature to be the man he thought she wanted. "I do not want a gentle merchant anymore." Gwendolen commanded, her voice ringing with sudden fierce authority that shocked even Desmond. She looked directly into her husband's terrified brown eyes. "I want my king! Rip his throat out!" Something snapped within Cedric. The suppression of a lifetime shattered in a single heartbeat. The golden rings on his fingers cracked and popped as his hands expanded into massive razor-sharp claws. The velvet tunic shredded as muscles exploded beneath his skin. The silver poison in his veins was instantly boiled away by a surge of pure, uncontrollable alpha fury. Desmond's smirk vanished, replaced by sheer horror. He released Gwendolen and swung his silver sword down with all his might. It was a useless gesture against a god of war. The monstrous black wolf caught the silver blade in its bare hand. The metal burned, but the beast did not even flinch. With a flick of its massive wrist, the broadsword shattered into a dozen pieces. The roar that erupted from the Lycan king shattered every glass window in the manor, a sound so terrifying it brought Desmond's guards to their knees in absolute panic. Cedric did not offer peace negotiations this time. He moved like a shadow woven from violence. He grabbed Desmond by the throat, hoisting the heavily armored lord off the ground with a single hand. The cruel nobleman gurgled, kicking his legs uselessly, as the Alpha's amber eyes burned into his soul. With a sickening definitive crunch, Cedric crushed Desmond's throat. He tossed the lifeless body aside like a broken doll. The remaining guards scrambled toward the door, screaming for mercy, but the hallway was already blocked. Kalen and the pack, fully transformed into towering wolves of grey and brown, poured into the corridors, answering their king's call to war. The slaughter was absolute. When silence finally returned to the burning manor, Gwendolen knelt on the blood-soaked rug. The giant black wolf stood amidst the carnage chest, heaving, covered in the blood of his enemies. He looked down at his massive lethal claws, a low, mournful whine escaping his throat. He had broken his vow. He was a monster once again. Slowly he shrank back into his human form, collapsing naked and exhausted onto the floor. He curled into a ball, weeping openly, waiting for Gwendolen to run from him in disgust. Instead, she crawled over the debris and wrapped her arms fiercely around him. She pulled his head against her chest, kissing his sweat-drenched hair. "It is over," she whispered, rocking him gently. "I am a monster." He sobbed, his voice completely broken. "I am a killer. I ruined our peace." "You are my protector," Gwendolen corrected fiercely, pulling his face up so he was forced to look at her. "You built an empire of gold to save your people, but gold cannot buy peace from wicked men. Only strength can do that. You are the Alpha King, Cedric, and I am your Luna. We will rebuild this empire not just with coin, but with fangs." Cedric stared at her, his amber eyes shimmering with awe and unspeakable love. He saw no fear in her gaze, only a fierce, unwavering devotion. He pressed his lips to hers, tasting ash blood and a future he never thought possible. In the years that followed, the legend of Cedric Valerius changed. He remained the wealthiest billionaire merchant in the realm, expanding his trade routes far beyond Oakhaven, negotiating treaties with a smile and a heavy purse of gold. He continued to wear fine silks, read poetry, and dote on his beautiful wife with an obsessive, sweet devotion. But the nobles of the realm learned a very important lesson. They learned never to disrespect the merchant's wife, never to threaten his trade routes, and never to venture into the Whispering Woods during a full moon. Because beneath the velvet and the gold beat the heart of a savage king, and his Luna held the chain. Gwendolen and Cedric ruled their vast empire together, proving that true love embraces both the light and the dark. This sweet billionaire merchant was secretly the deadliest Alpha King all along, and his fierce Luna loved every part of him. Did you enjoy this thrilling medieval werewolf romance? If this dramatic tale of hidden secrets, wealth and fangs kept you entertained, please hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more epic stories.